I am trying to democratize the availability of certain tax breaks for smaller companies who would benefit a lot from them, but don't have the expertise to interact with them.
Hello and welcome. Today, it is an honor to be joined by Mr. Eric Feltin, a graduate of MIT with a degree in electrical engineering and computer science. In the early 2000s, Eric pioneered peer-to-peer architectures for mobile digital entertainment, becoming a significant industry influencer even before the smartphone era. Today, Eric joins us to discuss how AI is disrupting industry and what we can do about it. Eric, welcome and thank you for being here.
Thank you very much for having me, Cynthia.
So your career has been quite diverse, from management consulting to founding a mobile entertainment company and then later focusing on the rules and regulations. So how has this diverse background influenced your approach to AI accountant, and what unique perspectives do you bring to the table?
I think it's common for people as they get older. You start out your career path and you think you're going to go one way, and then opportunities come up and you jump from side to side. So I've had many different careers in a sense, and I've jumped around. And I have mentioned that I have a significant involvement in a charity here in the UK, which is focused on exclusion and deprivation, in particular people with substance misuse. So I think it's given me, over the long career, it gives me a good understanding of technology, a good understanding of marketing and business, and then a good understanding of kind of social equity issues. And so that's what I kind of bring together. And one thing that I mentioned during our first interview is that this will sound perhaps a little bit overly grand, but I am trying to democratize the availability of certain tax breaks for smaller companies who would benefit a lot from them, but don't have the expertise to interact with them. And this is where I think AI actually works quite well.
So that's really interesting. And I guess my next question was, you chose to launch your business in accounting, your AI business in accounting. Yeah. So why did you conclude that accounting was the industry ripe for AI disruption?
I studied AI back at MIT in the 1980s. It's been around for a long time. There have been a lot of innovations in recent years. 2019, there was a very large step change improvement, which I won't bother talking about. But I think AI is particularly good. The models that are out there right now, GPT, the T stands for transformers. And basically what it's doing is it's basically like a translator. It's very good at repeating what other people have said, but it's not very creative. So looking at various industries, I kind of have come to the conclusion that industries that act as gatekeepers for specialized knowledge are ripe for replacement by AI or augmentation with AI. So the obvious ones that come to mind are doctors, lawyers, and accountants. Now, this is not to say that lawyers don't do anything creative, but there's a lot of work which is a bit boilerplate, and a lot of it where they understand the law and they need to explain it to you. They understand your circumstances and they need to map it to the law. The same thing with accountants. You make your expenses, they have to decide where to put it in the charts of accounts, because then that feeds into the tax code. So making a claim for tax relief is kind of the bridging together of law and accounting. So that's why I really liked it, because there's a complicated set of rules that you have to follow, and it gets back to the numbers. And that's why I decided to start there.
Really interesting. What would be like the size company? Well, I mean, I know that it could be probably used in any size company, but what's your target that you think is going to get the most benefit out of a product like yours?
So in the UK, and this is true of almost every developed country, there are tax breaks to encourage innovation. And in the UK, any company of any size can apply, and there are 5.5 million companies then who are eligible for R&D tax credits. But only 78,000 apply. And it's mostly the large companies, and the large companies tend to be claiming a lot of money. Because they're claiming a lot of money, they can afford professional advisors, professional lawyers to help them with their claims. In addition, recently, the UK government has been trying to crack down on what they believe are fraudulent or non-compliant claims. And so they've been raising the complexity of the applications. So only larger and larger and larger companies are able to have access to the expertise to apply. So my target market is smaller than that. So knowing professionals in this field, they wouldn't be interested in working with a company who's not spending at least £300,000 a year on R&D. Maybe you're only spending 10% of your money on R&D, so you have to be a multi-million pound company in order to even afford the consultants. And 90% of the claims that are filed right now are filed with professional help. So I want to help the smaller companies who can't afford the professional help. And basically, small companies with between 1 and 9 employees is kind of my target market. You have a lot of companies with 0 employees, which are like boxes that are holding intellectual property. They're not really trading. I'm looking for trading businesses that are being innovative, that are small innovators, where this money would really make a big impact on them.
So can you explain how your AI simplifies the process of claiming these tax credits and why it's so crucial for the smaller business owners?
Yes. The application process, essentially, there's 2 steps. First, you need to justify that you as a company have done something which is innovative and is covered by this particular tax legislation. Once you have jumped over that hurdle, and it's a very high hurdle, then HMRC, who's the tax authority in the UK, doesn't really have a strong opinion about what numbers you claim are related to the R&D. I'm not saying that there's fraud, but what I'm saying is that once they accept that trying to build this particular product was innovative and does qualify, then when your accountant says, and we spent £50,000 doing that, they go, fine, you spent £50,000. They don't really go through the numbers in great detail. A lot of tax authorities, if you think about it when you file your taxes, largely they trust you to tell the truth. So you claim certain charitable donations, they believe you. They audit a few people, but largely people are honest. So the biggest hurdle for the application process is being able to explain what you've done and to tick the 43 requirements that the government has said you have to meet in order for it to be legislation and to qualify. So AI is very well suited to this because the requirements can be translated, and again, GPTs are kind of good translators. It can be translated from legal speak into the vernacular so that a business owner can understand what we're getting at. And then the business owner describes their business, and the AI can kind of translate that back into the regulations and go, okay, what you've said sounds good, but there's an exclusion. You're not allowed to spend, it is not innovation if you're just improving the marketing of a product or you're just improving the packaging. So what you've described to me sounds like you're just improving the packaging and the marketing. So can you explain this better? So there's this back and forth dialogue. And up until now, this is what the professionals, why you would get a professional advisor in this area, because they can wear the 2 hats. They can listen to the business owner and understand what the business is and then translate it into the regulations and say, okay, it doesn't quite fit. You're missing these things. Is it that you don't have an innovative project that qualifies, or is it that you have not described something to me? So there's really a back and forth conversation. So that's why I think AI is very well suited to this.
Is your AI available in the US as well, or is it just a European with your tax laws?
So right now it is UK only. I have read through the UK tax laws. It's virtually identical. There will be little tweaks in the requirements. For example, the UK, we have the North Sea where they extract oil and gas, natural gas. So there's paragraphs in the UK's requirements talking about if you're an oil and gas company, here are certain requirements. So there will be certain specific kind of, let's say, earmarks that have been put in the UK. But largely, all the countries that I've looked at, and I've looked specifically at the US, they are broadly looking for the same thing. They want innovation because they know that innovation creates jobs and attracts investment. And largely, they just want to make sure that it's actually a step forward. It's not just tweaking around the edges. It's not the packaging. It's not the marketing. It's not the blurbs. You're actually doing something tangible to the product itself or to the process.
What would you say are some of the limitations of using AI in any of these industries?
I would say a key limitation is that AIs do hallucinate. Fundamentally, what AI does is it tries to predict what a human would say next. So given a particular question, how would a human answer it? So if you've ever spoken to ChatGPT or Bard or any of the AIs which are commercially available, if you ask it some information, let's say, tell me a quote that Winston Churchill said or something, and then you ask for a reference for that, they're getting better at it now. It would often make up the reference. Or for example, you say, I want to market my product and I want to market it on social media. List some social media creators who I should contact to have a relationship with to discuss my product. It will just make them up because it doesn't know the difference between a fact and something which is made up, because it's basically trying to sound like a human being. So this is what a hallucination is that the AI is trying to sound like a human being. And this then is a problem when you're trying to meet requirements. So I have 43 requirements. The business owner meets 42 of them. The AI would be very quickly, it could very easily just make something up to meet the 43rd requirement, and then everything's tickety-boo. So you need to have a lot of checks and balances back and forth to make sure that it isn't hallucinating.
I learned that sort of the hard way because I have a book that's coming out in end of January, February. And it was like a year-long process of writing. And then very early, I was doing a lot of research. So I'm just throwing all this stuff into ChatGPT. It's giving me these great references and citations. And then my editor goes, like none of these are accurate. And I'm going, really? What? So I had to get back and redo all of my research, which was hours and hours of work.
Well, some people have lost their job. There was, I mentioned it in our earlier interview, there was a lawyer, I think it was in Colorado in May of this year, who had this amazing brief with all of these perfect citations that he filed to the judge. And the judge looked through them and goes, these are all made up. You should at least check your facts here. So this is definitely a problem. But there are tactics to address this. One tactic that they say is basically it's kind of like flipping a coin multiple times. Ask the same question multiple times, and if it comes up with the same answer, then it's more likely to be a fact. But if it comes up with different answers, well, then it's more likely made up. But you can also, there's ways of kind of phrasing the question. So in our implementation of AI Accountant, we actually do 3 passes. The first pass, the AI is given the context and has to educate the user as to the context. It then gets the reply. It then goes through and tries to find how the reply doesn't meet the requirements. And then it separately analyzes whether it thinks that it was accurate in its assessment. I can go into this in more technical detail, but likely would bore you. But so we've done multiple passes behind the scenes to get rid of the hallucinations. So sometimes I give it a positive spin when it's explaining things to the user and it's giving examples. Okay, you haven't really explained this very well. Did you mean this? Therefore, I wanted to hallucinate. But then when we get an answer, I then say, okay, this fact, did the user actually say this or did you say this? So you cut it with multiple passes and then you can eliminate most of the hallucinations. You can't be 100% sure. So the last step then with our product is it produces a summary for the business owner and says, have I understood what you said correctly? Here's what I'm going to tell HMRC. And so hopefully the process is an educational process along the way where the business owner comes to understand what HMRC is looking for. So then when it reads the text, it goes, yes, that is true. That actually is not true. Let me change that bit, etc.
Yeah, that's interesting. What I ended up doing is I would do my own research and then I would take my content and I would put them both into ChatGPT and I would say, am I correct in that this research is actually validating what I'm saying here? And it would give me examples. So it did help me, but it didn't help me as much as I was hoping it was going to help me in the beginning, because that was a rude awakening.
I think that's a very powerful example that you've given there. You tell it to do some research I've done this when I've applied for positions. I'm leaving my current charity and I'm applying to be on the boards of other charities. And when I write the covering letter, I will have it go, I will ask it, write the ideal covering letter given this job description. Okay. Now, separately, I will then write my own covering letter using my actual experience. And then I say, now compare the two and tell me what is missing out of mine that was in the ideal. So then it just lists and it says, oh, you haven't mentioned the fact that you go skydiving or whatever. And it's like, well, actually, I don't. So I can't mention it. If I just left it to ChatGPT, it would just insert that because that meets the requirements. So I really like that thing of saying, tell me what's missing, give me suggestions, looking at best practice, give me a suggestion for what's wrong here. And then I can decide whether I can fix it or not, because I'm not the perfect candidate in all situations. And so sometimes I have a gap, and that's a fact. And so you have to be careful. So I think your example is a perfect example of how you do it.
I think too, and when you have gaps, there are ways to explain those gaps that they actually end up being. It's one of my favorite books is called The Gap and the Gain, right? So you can look at the gap, or you can look at why that gap's actually a positive for the charity that you're applying to.
Absolutely, absolutely. And this is the key thing, is that when you then see that gap, what it's really doing is it's refocusing you. I'm so busy talking about myself that I've forgotten the job. The job wants somebody with international experience in food distribution. Actually, I don't have that. I've forgotten that because I was too busy talking about myself. But what are they actually looking for? Okay, actually what they want is they want the international experience. They want the distribution. I haven't distributed food, but I have distributed car accessories. So I can be honest and explain that I don't have that skill, but here's how I think I'm covering what you're looking for. So this approach actually helps you think. So AI is really a tool to shine a light back on what you're doing so that, it's an honest person who's reading your work and saying, you've actually missed some points here. You haven't covered this. You've overemphasized that, et cetera.
Yeah, I've become like on a first name basis with my chat in the mornings. It's like, good morning, Cynthia. And then I'll ask it often. I'm like, I want to send an email to do this. And here's what I've written. And it'll respond with, well, what a thoughtful email. Here's how you can enhance. And I'm like, I have a friend. When you work at home, it's nice to have friends where you can get them. So let's talk about some of the ethical challenges that you see. What are some of the primary ethical concerns that you find, especially in accounting? Let's stick with that because that's your area of expertise here with AI.
I would say that my primary expertise actually isn't accounting. My primary expertise is as a business owner and as a technologist. And that as a business owner, you wear many hats. And I have worn a legal hat and written contracts. And I've worn a legal hat and written complaints and court filings, but I'm not a lawyer. And I've worn an accounting hat, and I kind of understand how the accounting works. So the ethical considerations, the reason why I'm putting that caveat is because I actually want to branch out wider than accounting. And if I go too wide, rein me back in. I think the ethical considerations with AI in any business is that it is a good tool to help you. But as you found, it didn't really help you. What it did was it focused you in on the things that you need to really work on. So I think AI will make people very productive. So in my 40-hour, let's say, work week, normally there's only 5 hours worth of really hardcore thinking, and then there's 35 hours of kind of licking envelopes. And well, obviously people don't do that anymore. I'm showing my age there. But anyways, there will be 35 hours worth of meetings and other things that I'm doing, which are kind of low intensity, and there's 5 hours of high intensity. Now, the problem is that if AI gets rid of all of that low intensity work, because it can do it itself and it's all heavily predictable, I can't do 40 hours of intensive work during a week. I don't have the mental capacity to do that. And this is a risk with AI, is as it upskills people and allows them to focus in on the meat of it, I think we're going to find that people can't put in 40-hour weeks. And so maybe the world we need to be in is everybody has a job where they work 1 day a week, 1 hour a day, but that 1 hour is a really good solid hour of creative thought. So there's a lot of building from AI, which is saying, this is the thing we need to focus in on this, an hour of an intensive work, and then you go home and the AI kind of polishes it all off. When I've been writing prompts for AI, it's so intensive trying to get exactly the wording and the order and the emphasis exactly how I want it. It's just draining to do that.
It is. And I'm sure what you're writing is far more complex than things that I'm writing with, newsletters. But even on those, you have to be so particular. It's like, here's a template. I want you to follow this template. Here are the topics. Here are the tips. Here's the information I want in. And then it'll add stuff. And you're going like, no, I didn't say that. And it is. It's a lot of thinking. And it's a lot of, it does cut a lot of time. But it also, if you don't take the time, the quality of what you get isn't going to be that great.
Exactly. And so I'm the exact same way. And I'm similar to you. I use AI for anything that I write to really kind of hone it in and make sure that I haven't missed the points. But the work that I then do is highly productive, but very, very intensive. And I don't think we want to live in a world where everybody has to work that hard for 40 hours. I think it'll burn everybody out. And then similarly, as we mentioned, as I kind of alluded to during our first interview, I don't think that there are enough jobs in the world for everybody to have a job working that intensively. There isn't that much stuff we need to create. There isn't that much problems to be solved or tax codes to be analyzed. And so I kind of think that the natural course of this is that people need to be working fewer hours, but much more intensively and focused during those hours.
Perhaps we can get someone focusing and being intent on like immigration and, some of the, world hunger, get some of the big problems solved.
Well, you and I, I'm sure, could speak for hours on the flaws of capitalism, kind of being in a charity, trying to solve some of these problems. We're not trying to create value for the shareholders. We're trying to make the world a better place. And I kind of wish that modern corporations kind of had that written into the law. Not only do you have to serve your shareholders, but you have to serve society. Explain to us how you made the world a better place while you were making a profit. If every company had to do that, at least maybe they wouldn't, but at least they'd have to sit there and think about, well, what am I doing in the world? Am I actually doing good?
Yeah, that would be, maybe AI will help people's thinking expand a bit. And,
Yes.
because it does. It helps your thinking. And you hit that exactly on the head. Even with writing chapters in the book, I would spend a week writing a chapter, then I would take sections of it and say, could I be more clear here? How could I be more clear in my, and it would write it. And I'm like, holy crap, why didn't I think of that? And then the next week when I'm writing another chapter, it had to do less and less. So it does expand your own thinking. And if we could get more of that happening in the world, it could be a good thing for everyone.
It could be indeed. One quick just reaction to what you've said. One thing that you may have noticed when it was helping you write your novel, AI is really bad at analogies. I don't know if you've ever tried this, but it's kind of built into the technology. One of the big advances in 2019 was they really emphasized attention. And so the AI is focusing in on one context, and that's what makes it sound so consistent. But it's also really bad then at context shifting. And so if you're trying to bring two things together, talk about car racing, but use the analogy of space travel, something like that, the sorts of analogies that AI will create are superficial at best. Mm-hmm. And what I found is the great thing that a human does is find a really good analogy that explains a complicated situation that you're not familiar with, but puts it into terms that you can understand. And so AI can't do that. And I've tried several times. I've tried really hard with prompting to get it to do it. And it's just really superficial, flat stuff. Yeah. And so when you were writing your novel, you might have found that. And that's where the clarity comes in. It can get the words right and the grammar right, but the thought, it can't really get the thought really sparking there for you. You've got to get the thought distilled, and then it can put it into words. It can package it.
It's funny because I like literally have typed into ChatGPT like, no, that's just really stupid. An executive wouldn't talk that way. Like nobody says that.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's going, I'm sorry, Cynthia, my mistake. It was funny. But you're right. It's some of those analogies, I'm like, my book is a leadership book. I'm talking to executives. Some of this stuff was just so far out there, but that's good. That's why I wrote it. And, a lot of it was interviews with real people that I interviewed for hours and hours. And if I put something into ChatGPT and said, help me say this more clearly, they would change their quotes. I'm like, yeah, no, that's not going to work. So you're exactly right. The analogies, the thought. And I think, though, that there's value in that because it does force us to think. It forces us to stop and look at something. We might use an analogy that doesn't work. And we're not going to think about it until we see it like in a different context. Like when ChatGPT does it, you're going, that is really stupid. Meanwhile, something you wrote could have been just as stupid and you might not have noticed it last week, but this week you'll notice it.
Exactly. This is one thing why I want to be a little bit careful when I say that accounting, lawyers, and doctors will be replaced by AI, because they won't. And I was thinking about, there was one situation, a commercial situation in our industry, where the industry needed to file legal papers against a company to get them to do something, but we didn't have a direct relationship with them. And so then when I sat down with barristers, in the UK, they split off barristers and solicitors, and barristers are the ones who do this really good metaphors. And I was trying to explain the situation, and he said, this reminds me of a law from the 1600s. There were two sailing ships off the coast of Africa, and one was trading with the natives, and the other one was firing cannons at the natives, and it was interfering with trade. And it was those sorts of analogies, especially in a legal context, when you read really well-written legal briefs or really well-written judgments, it's just so obvious and so clear. And oftentimes, it's from the drawing of these analogies. This is akin to if there were two ships trading with a local community, and one of them is not shooting at the other ship, but it's shooting at the natives who are rowing out to it. They're still interfering with the trade. And then it's like, that's actually a brilliant analogy, because now I can picture it, because our world gets so abstract. And so AI won't be replacing these industries, but it'll be helping these barristers, or the really good forensic accountants, or the really good doctors who are looking at clever ways of doing things. AI won't be able to do that, but it'll get rid of the elimination of 20 different possibilities. This person presents with certain symptoms. Well, it's not all of these things because the symptoms don't match up, but it could be any of these 5. And these are the tests you could do to figure it out. But then once you've kind of figured it out, there may be some complications, and that's where the human creativity comes in to kind of figure out how to do something new, create something new.
I can see even in the medical field where it could just be ruling stuff out faster than physicians could rule it out themselves. And process of elimination, it's going to help narrow the field.
And rule stuff in. I was just watching on Amazon, The Good Doctor. So there is a doctor, I think he has autism.
Yeah,
and he's a brilliant doctor because he remembers all of these obscure diseases and all of these obscure symptoms. And well, AI would be perfect for that as well. Because it can look at the symptoms and say, rule out all of those. I know you particularly like it when people have cirrhosis, but this person does not have cirrhosis of the liver. But you've forgotten all of these other ones. So this is the actual pool of things you should be looking at. So it'll help and not replace.
So if I were to say to you, what is it that you want the world to know about AI and how it's disrupting? What's the most important thing that you think people need to know today?
This may come across as slightly off topic, but let me phrase it this way anyways. I kind of think that our economic system is on the verge of being broken. Back 100 years ago, in order to produce something, as a business owner, I needed to buy raw materials. I needed to ship it to my factory. I needed to build a factory. I needed to have workers. I needed to pay the workers. And then the profits would get split amongst everybody. Having run digital businesses, I have no raw materials costs. I have no distribution costs. I have no labor costs. Once I build my product, I can sell it to 10 people or 1 million people, and there's no costs to all of those additional sales. And this is why the world now has 100 billionaires. And the wealth is being, the system for distributing wealth no longer works because there's only one thing you need to own. You need to own the intellectual property or own the business. There's no owning the raw materials, being a worker, owning the factory, any of this other kind of stuff. So I think AI is going to exacerbate this. And as I've talked about, it'll allow me to distill my 40-hour work week let's say, into 5 hours of concentrated effort, the natural solution to that then is to fire 7/8 of the population. Now, the theory is that innovation always creates as many jobs as it destroys, but are we now at the point where there's already too much content on streaming services? We don't need any more movies. We don't need any more television programs. We don't need any more social media people. There's plenty of factories producing candy, producing cars, producing everything. Maybe we're to the point where this whole idea that everybody has a job is obsolete. So if 90% of the people, we don't need them as a world, we don't need 90% of the people to have jobs, does that mean that just 10% of the people get all the money and own everything? So there's just billionaires and then people who are on the food line? Or is there a better way of organizing this? So I'm fairly off topic. This isn't just AI, but I thought I would throw in a little bit of a rant here. So various countries are experimenting with a basic income, a guaranteed income to everybody. And maybe that's the start of the solution. But so that's my fear with AI, is that it will be used to force you and me to be hyper productive for 40 hours of a week, or we're on the breadline.
Your philosophy and theory sounds very much like my daughter could have just been in your spot, because she has the same instance, which I totally respect. But she's one of the smartest people I know.
All right.
So what advice would you give to entrepreneurs who are considering whether or not they want to integrate AI into their business? Based on your experience, what advice would you give to the entrepreneur?
You have to jump in. You have to start tinkering with it. I mentioned during our first interview that I have been an established player in an industry, and new people have come in, and it was very easy for me to criticize what they were doing and saying, well, they're not doing it the right way. A lot of those people failed, but some of them succeeded. Mm-hmm. And our world is becoming a more winner takes all world. When you advertise on Google, you either can pay for, if I can pay 1 pence more for advertising, I can buy all the advertising space and you get the advertising I don't want. And so it's a very much winner take all world, and people will be coming in, disrupting your industry with wild ideas and different approaches. Now, a lot of those people will fail. You will have an established business that you need to continue with, but there will be people coming in and somebody's going to leapfrog you and crush you. And so you have to be watching out what everybody's doing, and you need to be experimenting with it. So you can't just say, it'll never work. We're going to do it the old professional way. We have these trained people who have been experts working on R&D tax claims for 20 odd years. They know how to have the conversations. We want personal relationships with people. Well, if somebody else comes in and can do it for 1/10 the cost, and they're 90% as good, you're going to have a very hard time competing against that. So my advice is you have to dive in and you have to start experimenting with this. Don't go all in. You still have a business to run, but you have to have a side bit and give them free rein to experiment.
So it sounds like risk. Don't be afraid of taking risk.
Correct. Because I think the bigger risk is to not react. And there will be very odd edge cases that come in. Well, you have found, I'm sure, from writing your own book, that now ChatGPT or Bard or whichever one you're using is now indispensable to your process. As you said, you wake up in the morning, the first thing you do is you say hello, and it says, hello, Cynthia. Obviously, that was slightly a joke, but the point is that it is so productive and it is so general that you're going to have to find a way to use this to improve your business. It won't replace your business. You're going to find this bit can be replaced with AI, and this bit can be replaced, and this bit can't, but this bit can, and in a different way. So you're going to have to kind of rebuild the puzzle a bit. You're going to have to break down your business and say, this can be optimized, this cannot. And the government will pay you to do this because it's innovation, and you'll get an R&D tax credit if you're doing innovation, if you're applying AI to improve your business. So there you go.
So there you go. What I find really time saving for me is when we're going to go facilitate a workshop, I can put all the content that we want to teach in the workshop into AI and to say, put this in a spreadsheet form, facilitator's guide with times. And usually that takes me, it takes me a good 2-3 hours to really take all of my content and break it into a facilitation guide. I throw it in ChatGPT and like 32 seconds later, it's done. And all I have to do is tweak it. It's still my content. It's still our information that we're facilitating. And yet that guide is done instantaneously, which is so nice.
Well, exactly. And if you didn't you will have competitors who are able to facilitate, and either they will be able to supply your clients cheaper because they won't have as much time that they have to spend beforehand preparing, or they will end up with a better product for the customer because they will have been able to put in 2 weeks of preparation because ChatGPT will have reduced it to 2 hours, whereas you're only putting in 2 hours worth of presentation or preparation. And then, as I also had suggested, or they can start providing facilitation to people who normally couldn't afford it. So normally you will charge 2,000, 5,000 pounds a day, and only certain companies can afford that. But now with ChatGPT, you could automate it and have online facilitation, which isn't as good as you, but you can have a whole client base now who is where you're serving a client base who normally could not benefit from you. Between reading your book and having you in person, you can provide a halfway house service that didn't exist before.
Yeah, middle ground.
A middle ground, exactly. And so that's what we chose to do, is target a part of the market who currently doesn't get the money from the government and can't afford the advisors. So trying to find a new niche and democratize this tax benefit.
So as our listeners are hearing you talk about this tax benefit and they're excited about it and they want to learn more, where is the best place for them to reach out to you? All your links will be posted, but I'd like to hear from you if you'd prefer LinkedIn or prefer your website, email.
I think email would be best, probably. I'm dabbling in social media, but I'm of an age where I keep my phone on silent. And so many people complain that when they call me, I don't answer. If you need to reach me, the best way to reach me is email. I don't mind getting too many messages because I may not reply immediately, but email I find useful because I can kind of leave it in my inbox and then reply at will. And so that'll be listed in the article. The other thing is, as you have mentioned, my service at the moment is only the UK. I will be launching in the US soon, but I'm not going to promise any particular date. But I would encourage every company, if you're doing anything which is innovative, just Google R&D tax relief in your area, Washington State, California, wherever you are. I'm sure some advisors will come up, and just start talking to them. The benefits are vast in most jurisdictions. In the UK, if I spend £12,000 on a project, the government will literally write me a check for £4,000. So even if I'm loss making, I could take £4,000 off my taxes, but they'll write me a check if I'm loss making and just give me the money. So, you get a third back. This is in addition to just the normal, tax benefits of expenditure. So it's very generous in most countries. So I would encourage anybody who's listening, who's doing any innovative stuff. If you're listening to AI, you're probably doing some innovative stuff in your own services. Just keep track of it and then speak to professionals or investigate it and get paid.
And keep an eye out for your product coming into a country near you.
Indeed. Fingers crossed.
So, well, thank you very much. It was invaluable and insightful and appreciated. To our listeners, I hope you found value in this episode of the Care to Lead podcast, where we share leadership rooted in care. Until next time, remember, leaders who care to lead. Subscribe to the podcast for more conversations with today's top leaders. Thank you, Eric.
Thank you very much.